main speaker, Sidi Omar Qureshi, is just joining us now, and we'll be beginning in just a moment. Alhamdulillah, today we begin yet another one of our seminars in mature Islamic philosophy, or as we like to call it, the Walk Through the Mawaqif, an important book of Kalam by Al-Iji, Sheikh Al-Iji. We've thus far discussed a number of the Mawaqif, the major chapter headings or sections of the book that are subdivided into smaller units, beginning with the introductory chapters that treat subjects such as the Mabadi al-Ashra, the 10 foundational points of departure, or the 10 essentials that one must have before they begin the study of any subject, discussions of the definition of knowledge and the subdivisions of knowledge, and another, there's a set of introductory questions, masail, topics, problems, topics of study in this science that are mentioned in the muqaddimat, in the introductory section, and then it moves on to the umur amma, general matters such as existence, definitions and discussions of existence and non-existence, quiddity, modality such as necessity, possibility, and impossibility, and a number of other initial introductory matters that are very important for the discussions as we move forward. We then moved on to the chapter on contingent properties or accidents, and discussed a number of different positions and schools on the ontological status of these contingent properties, as well as some of their application. Then we moved on to the subject of the jawahir, or the contingent objects, or substance, as it's typically translated. That was our fourth mawqif. And now we are on to the chapter on theology, or ilahiyat. So we had quite a number of discussions before we got to this point. What this tells us is that when we get to a certain level in the study of ilm al-kalam, we don't just dive right in to the narration of creed, nor do we even just dive right into the main proofs for tawheed. Rather, there's quite a bit of additional information that's studied in depth that may not even look like theology, that may look more like philosophy or even physics, until we get to, we cover a bunch of core details in those topics until we get to our topic at hand, which is ilahiyat and sama'iyat. And so with that, I will let our speaker today, Sheikh Omar Qureshi, take it from there. Jazakumullahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته سيدي. طيب، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Let's see here. So if I can get permission, Sidi Harun, to share.
I think Sidi Shoaib on Sidi Hamza's account will have to do that. I don't know that I can do that.
Oh, okay, yeah. I got some documents to share.
Okay. Sidi Shoaib or Sidi Hamza, are you there? I know Sidi Hamza's on his way, but his son Shoaib was with us earlier. Let me see if I can get a hold of them real quick. Okay, it'll just be a moment, inshallah.
Good.
Okay, you should be all set now.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Hey, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam ajma'in. So we have arrived at the sixth station here, the last and final one, and this station I understand will be divided between the first Marsad on prophetology or Nubuwa, and then the second Marsad on the resurrection. And in this session, I will attempt to cover the first Marsad, which is on prophetology and related matters. And our next session, I think it'll be City Saf, who will take care of the on the resurrection and the other marasid of on names and classifying people on the imam and the appendix. But I'll cover the entire mawqif just briefly, and then we'll give an overview in the light of in the spirit of EG's approach, and then what we'll do is we'll dive into the first marsa today. So what we're looking at essentially here is this section. This last mawqif al-sadis, is focusing on what he's calling the sam'iyat. And the sam'iyat is a term in Quran books which entails, or which basically means those matters and those doctrine that can only be affirmed by revelation, and that can either mean scripture, in the sense the Quran, or the Prophet, and what can be affirmed and what the Prophet ﷺ says. So the sam'iyat are those matters that are required for belief, but which can only be known via revelation in particular. So and in terms of the relationship to the intellect, all the understanding in Ash'ari works throughout this whole section is that all of these sam'iyat that have been all the doctrine that have been communicated via revelation, and then classified as sam'iyat, are rationally possible. They come from that category of rational judgments, and so they're all rationally possible. However, so establishing something's something being, a doctrine being rationally possible is one thing, but then to affirm its actual occurrence, or that it actually has taken place, and that is where the role of revelation comes in. So the revelation comes in here. One of the functions of revelation is to affirm an item that is considered to be logically possible here. So when he's talking about here the on prophets and prophetology in the first section, here, what Al-Iji does in his Maqsad al-Awwal is he tackles the topic here of what does it mean to be a prophet, or what does the word an-nabi mean, fi ma'na an-nabi. And here he goes through what he classifies as the Ahlul Haq, their definition, and then he goes through some of his main interlocutors. And in this case, it's going to be the Falasifa, and he goes through their definition of a prophet and to show what the distinction is between the two. And then he engages the philosophers' understanding of nubu, or of a nabi. In aim 2, after he's done with this, this sets him up to deal with the next topic, which is al-maqsad al-thani, which is fi haqiqat al-mu'jiza, on the true nature of a miracle, and again here he's going to provide what he calls the definition of a miracle, but then he's going to first go into what are the conditions for a phenomena to be considered miraculous. And so he provides 7 conditions that a phenomena has to meet to be considered a miracle. And then after he tackles that, in the same maqsad, he goes through and deals with the issue of how does a miracle actually take place. And so here, like, how does a miracle occur? And again, here he'll tackle various opinions, and then he'll give also the Ash'ari understanding, and then he'll contrast that with the philosopher's understanding of how a miracle takes place. So you can, and then the third issue he deals with is on the actual on the signification of a miracle, and this is an important section, which is if the miracle is a message, so to speak, right? And it signifies something. Just what does it signify, and then how does it signify? What is its mode of signification, and its kayfiyatul dalala? And then he talks about exactly what does a miracle communicate, and he goes through that in this section, and being sent. So he's going to establish the logical possibility that a prophet can actually be sent, and feel him kind of intellectual traditions and theological traditions.
Recording in progress.
And when he's and so what he's going to do here is this section is divided into, he provides 4 different approaches on how the prophethood of, or the veracity of the claim to prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is established. And the first approach, so he deals with 5 approaches. The first approach comes from miracles. And so after having established what a miracle is and what the conditions of the miracle are, now he's kind of, and how does a miracle, what does it signify, and what's its mode of signification? Now he's able to miracles. The second approach, and then the third approach, and then finally with and then a number of objections to the claims of prophethood. Those claims to those objections. This sets him up for aim 5, which he deals with after him up to issue of
Recording in progress.
He and um, and what mode and a prophet mindfulness and kufr take place from a prophet, and then he and then he goes into minor sins, the other. So all of these are according to into by first. And the last three deal with the issue of story of the non-exploits, karam, and ability of and then occurrence. And what we'll cover, and just to cover, to give an idea of the whole multiple. The second Marsad now deals with resurrection, and here there's many issues that he goes through, and I'll leave this city staff to cover next week, and because he'll go through in detail on all of these issues. But nonetheless, the main topics here are the res issues, such as the i'adatul ma'dum, the recreating of the non-existent entity and creation of something. And again, these are sam'iyat because they can only be affirmed via revelation. And then they go to al-asma wal-ahkam, on names and how do you classify people. And this deals in general with the issue of someone be called a believer or depending on their act, and an unbeliever and a hypocrite. And the fourth Marsad deals with the topic of the image and all the sub issues that go under that. And then he ends not by work on what he calls the firaq, the heretical sects mentioned by Messenger in a thing, and states that this community will be divided into 70 some odd sects, and it's been numerous attempts, and this is a legitimizes them on the major sects in the Muslim community. So the Mu'tazila, Shiites, the Kharijites, and Murji'ites, and the Jabarites, and then sects, which he considers to be the Ash'ari, and the scholars of Hadith and Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah at her work appropriately, because the whole purpose is that it is salvation in the end. Okay, now with that, we then can get into some details now. We can go back to prophetology and look at what Aluddin has about. Let's see here. Okay. So actual text, and we'll start and we'll focus on these sections here. So in this section here, again, here we're talking about is to define, and he says here is that هو لفظ منقول لغوي, and so he said that very typical of scholastic that they're looking at the relationship term classical meaning how it relates fil refers to the Sharia and how it transferred over to the Sharia. So he gives, the standard possibilities here, which is that it can come from, let's just see here we go, is that هو فقير هو المنبئ من النبأ, right? So ones that naba, it comes from that person is in or giving news from God, لإنبائه عن الله. And another meaning is min al-nabwa, right? وهو ارتفاع, meaning elevation because of the elevated nature of a prophet. And the third possible is min al-nabi وهو الطريق, and it means like a way, because the prophet is the way to Most High. So these are three lexical possibilities that he is here. And then he provides technical definition here, according to the theologians here. And so he says, فهو عند أهل الحق من قال له الله أرسلتك أو بلغ عني ونحوه من الألفاظ. So he says here is that a prophet, the technical definition of a prophet is someone who God has said, I have sent to you as a messenger, أرسلتك, or has said to this person, convey from me, right, or something of similar terms or expressions. So this is the definition, and Ahlul Haq here for him will be the Ahlul Sunnah or the Ash'ari. And he can select for his mercy whomever he wills amongst his creatures, amongst his slaves. And so, and وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ حَيْثُ يَجْعَلُ رِسَالَتَهُ, and he knows best where to place his risala, his messengership. And so these are all, this is obviously going from a verse of the Quran. And importantly, he says here is that all of this is based on a principle that, so this definition of a prophet is based on a principle that he mentions here. And he says, وَهَذَا بِنَاءٌ عَلَى الْقَوْلِ بِالْقَادِرِ الْمُخْتَارِ, that this understanding of a messenger or of a prophet and the statements that he's mentioned over here are all premised on the position that God is all-powerful, al-qadir, and a mukhtar, and we could say a free agent. He has ikhtiyar, right? Or we could translate that as choice. And the reason why he mentions this is because they're prior in the prior sections, right? In the sections on ontology and metaphysics and theology proper, there's an understanding of there are different understandings of the divine being, and one of the understandings of the divine being, which he would not agree with, is that this divine being is al-mujib, that is that the divine being is seen as a necessary cause, right? And so the world is an effect from God. And the other understanding that he's going to promote here is that no, God is a powerful agent that has power and the attribute of power, and at the same time is a free agent. So so that's why he mentions that here. And then he, after dealing with that, he goes to the positions of the Falasifa. And here in particular, the Falasifa are very, the school of the Falasifa is very wide, right? There's many different schools of philosophy under this term. And in particular, he's dealing with the peripatetic school, and of the peripatetics, it's in particular the Avicennan school. So if you look in the what he's going to quote here, Amal Falasifa, so he says that the philosophers hold that the prophet is someone who possesses three khawas, three specific qualities, right? And these qualities are specific only to a prophet. And you can find this in essentially what he's quoting here is Avicenna's position. His position, you can find that in the metaphysics towards the end of the Shifa of his metaphysics, where in the last sections he speaks about this. And then he has another treatise, Risala fi Ithbat an-Nubuwah, Avicenna, which which he does talk about prophethood specifically and dedicates the risala to it. It's not lengthy, but it's very important. And then you can look at this in the Najat. So what he's quoting here is coming from those three sources, and is particularly, it lines up with what Avicenna's arguments are for understanding of who a prophet is. So the first he says is that first of these three qualities, that all three must be present for a person to be considered a prophet, is أن يكون له اطلاع على المغيبات, is that such a person should have access to the unseen. And then the reason is because that human souls are considered to be mujarrad, are considered to be immaterial. And it has a nisba, a relationship to immaterial entities, and where forms of what will take place in the world are engraved in the soul and impressed in the soul, one could say. And so they go on to explain their their argument here. But the first quality is that such a person who's called a prophet has to possess the have access to all of the unseen. And so what E.G. does is he'll present the doctrine of the philosophers here, and then he'll give here in blue, he'll give his response to it. And in typical scholastic fashion, his response is going to be very succinct, almost terse, and like straight to the point. And then in the commentary, usually they'll flush out all of the other premises. But he says that when he's commenting on this, he said this is mardud, this condition for a prophet to possess this. He said that this condition, this first condition that they place that a prophet must have, this is rejected. So E.G. doesn't accept this claim. He says why? He says إذا الاطلاع على جميع المغيبات لا يجب للنبي اتفاقا. He says that the requirement that a prophet should know the entire of the unseen is not an obligation for a prophet, and this is agreed upon actually by both schools, meaning the philosopher and the mutakallimun. والبعض لا يختص به, and كما قررتم به. So what he's saying here is that he's objecting to this premise on numerous grounds, saying that we are already in agreement that a prophet doesn't have to have access to the entirety of the unseen, and some of that, some prophets don't have this particular quality, as you yourselves have, as the philosophers themselves have acknowledged. And so he gives his reasons here, and then he says the rest of the premises of this position, وَبَاقِ الْمُقَدِّمَاتِ خِطَابِيَّةٌ. He says the rest of the premises are of a khitabi nature. And again, he's bringing in the end parts of logic, meaning that they're not apodictic proofs, they're proofs that are rhetorical in nature. And Giordani glosses is saying that khitabi, meaning that they are very weak premises. So they're not even at the level of dhann, let alone of probability. They are, let alone of certainty. They're actually of weak premises. So he doesn't accept this as a condition. Then E.G. goes on to say the second quality that a prophet must possess, according to the philosopher, is that they should have, works that are khariq lil-'ada. So they should have works that are contrary to the habitual norms. Miracles, right, in other words. And then they explain how miracles take place. And so it's not that, and when they give their explanation here, E.G. provides an account of this, and it has to do with the prophet's soul being such that they're able to manipulate and actually create, they're actually able to manipulate and create created entities or entities in the elemental world. So it's not so much that E.G. disagrees with the fact that prophets, that miraculous acts come from prophets, but rather what he says in his objection to this is هذا بناء على تأثير النفوس في الأجسام والمقارنة لا تعطيه مع أنه لا يختص بالنبي. So he gives three objections to this. He's saying here, and the objections clarify see miracles really coming about and how they explain miracles, and the fact that a miraculous acts only occur to actual prophets, which is something he'll disagree with, as we'll see, because miracles can occur to saintly individuals, and it can occur to iniquitous individuals as well. But his response briefly is that this is based on the premise of that souls have an actual are effective causes and can cause things in bodily or in bodies at Sam. And he says, well, all we see is muqarana. All we see is a one event occurring at the same time as another, and that doesn't provide us anything demonstrative that it is the soul that actually has that is serving as an effective cause in that body. And then he says here, the last objection is مع أنه لا يختص بالنبي. He goes, while all of these, like these type of خوارق العادة, it's not specific to a prophet, meaning individuals other than a prophet have had, in fact, these type of preternatural events take place. The third quality is of the philosopher is that they say, and yara al-malaika musawwara, is that the prophet should see and behold angels in a particular form, right? And وَيَسْمَعْ كَلَامَهُمْ وَحْيًا, and he should be able to listen to the speech of angels as revelation. And so, and then he goes through their proofs, but then E.G.'s response here to this is that he says, هذا تلبيس وتستر بعبارة لا يقولون بمعناها. He objects, saying that this position, this third quality that prophets must possess, he says this is a deception, and this is like deceptive position. And it is kind of hiding behind words and whose meaning of the words they really don't affirm and they really don't commit to. Why? He says, لأنهم لا يقولون بملائكة يرون. He goes, because they do not hold that angels, right, are actual entities, right, which can see. He says, rather, angels, according, so the term angels, according to peripatetic philosophers, are immaterial souls, and they don't have speech and they don't hear, or they can't be heard. Right? Why? Because having speech and being the ability to hear is a specific quality of bodies, of ajsam. And so he's saying here is that what they affirm of angels is not the same as what other theological schools affirm angels to be, which is to be ajsam latifa, to be subtle bodies, and then all of these other aspects of angels, the ability to speak, right, and the ability to be heard and things like this, all would apply to bodies, but they have intelligences that are immaterial. And so he's saying here, that's his objection to this, to the three conditions that Avicenna places on who a prophet is, and that they have to possess these three qualities, and his objections to them. And so that kind of completes this first section here. And then he goes to the second section, which is, what is the definition of a miracle, haqiqatul mu'jiza? And he starts off saying here is that a miracle, according to his school, the Ash'arites, is ما قصد به إظهار الحق إظهار الصدق من ادعى أنه رسول الله. He says a miracle is that phenomena which is intended to manifest the truthfulness of the claim of someone who claims to be the messenger of God. And so here he's going to say, so that's the for E.G., and then he gives 7 conditions that he's going to speak to here. So the first condition here that he speaks about is that أن يكون فعل الله, is that the miracle must be the act of God, أو ما يقوم مقامه, or something that an act that can take the place of the act of God. And why does he? So that's the first condition, that it has to be an act of God. Why does he state that? He says because لأن التصديق منه لا يحصل بما ليس من قبله. Right, and so he says that to affirm the truthfulness of the claim of a prophet will not cannot take place if the act is from the prophet himself, the same person. It has to be from someone else. And I think this will become better appreciated once one understands what is it that a miracle signifies. And then what does he mean here by ma yaqumu maqamahu is something that can take the place of the act of God. And he gives an example to saying that this could include the prophet saying that my miracle is that I will place my hand on my head and you're not able to do so, and then the prophet would actually do that, and then the people around him are not able to do the same act. And he says, well, if you look at this scenario, there is no act of God in this particular scenario. And because he says the not creating power of the people to put their hands on their head is not an act. It's laysa fi'lan. And so he just wants to say here is that it can be an act of God or something that can stand in its place. And so he wants to clarify, what does he mean by that? So that's the first condition. The second condition for an act to be considered a miracle is that it has to be contrary to the habitual norms of the natural world, right, and how things take place. Al-ada, right, a term that's very familiar to the Ash'ari school in terms of how they describe the events that would take place in the natural world. And he says that, so it has to be a contravention of the natural norms, right? He says, "Idla i'jaza dunahu." He goes, for there's no, if it's not contravening the norms, then it won't be considered miraculous in that sense. And then he doesn't spend much time on that, but Giorgiani does in his commentaries, which one can look to. The third condition is that right, is that the actual act, the actual miracle, which so far is an act of God and has to be contrary to the natural norms. The third condition is that one cannot perform the same act in challenging, right, as it that act being done by the person claiming to be a prophethood. And because that negates the whole concept of i'jaz, is that the act itself cannot be replicated, right? So if you have an act and it's done and it's contrary to the norms of nature, but then someone comes and does the same act and challenges that act by doing the same act, well then okay, the whole conception of a miracle of i'jaz, of that act being incapacitating, right, not able to be replicable, well, it's been replicated, so it's no longer a miracle. So he says that the miracle cannot have, the third condition is for something to not to be a miracle, is that it cannot have a mu'aradah, it cannot have the act can't be replicated here. The fourth is an yakuna zahiran ala yadi mudda'i nubuwah, right? And so it should be the miracle should, the fourth condition is that it should be a phenomenon that's apparent, right, that can be observed at the hands of someone claiming prophethood. And so this will allow for that act to be known, and someone as that affirming that act is a tasdeeq, is an affirmation of that person's claim, right? And then he takes up the issue here is that, does the prophet have to explicitly state that it's a challenge to people? And in the end, Al-Iji says, Al-Haqqu annahu la, it goes that it's not a challenging you, and here's my challenge to prove the veracity of my claim. It's not something that has to be done explicitly, but nonetheless, it's not a condition, though. He says the context of when this particular act and claim takes place could be sufficient enough, right, to say that this is a challenge. It doesn't have to be explicit. So he says, "Qara'anu